High Court in Pretoria ordering that former President Jacob Zuma should go back to jail. It also has declared that the time that Zuma was out of jail on medical parole would not be counted as part of the fulfilment of his sentence, 15-month sentence to jail. Now, Zuma was given parole for medical reasons just weeks after being imprisoned for contempt of court. Let's get to legal analysis now. We speak to Dr. Llewelyn Curlewis, a legal expert who is joining us via the line. Doc, thank you very much for your time. I know that you've not read the judgment, but what's important here is that you read the prayers, you've read the court documents as this matter was being argued in court. For you, what stood out about this particular matter, and does it surprise you then, the conclusion that the judges have come to now?
Yes, thank you for the opportunity and very good morning to everybody. Indeed, the judgment is around about 34 pages. With all the legal arguments advanced, etc. But the fact of the matter is, if one looks at the prayers, to conclude that I am, as a legal persona myself, very happy with the results, in the sense that I think that the judgment itself is sound, in the sense that the judge came to the right conclusion, stating that the reasons advanced by Arthur Fraser did not stand public scrutiny and the principles of justice and equity. In other words, it was not founded in legal arguments, but was basically an arbitrary decision made by himself for whatever reason. So on that basis alone, I'm happy to suggest that the judge is correct when she stated that the decision must be set aside. So that's the one aspect. But you have mentioned in your introduction a very interesting issue, namely that the judge also, in prayer 5 of a judgment, came to the conclusion that the time spent on medical parole outside should not count as in favor of Zuma. In other words, calculated as part of his 15 months imprisonment. And remember, Arthur Fraser made this decision on the 3rd of September this year. Now, that being said, here's a couple of legal issues here. The first is, and foremost, is any person is in any event eligible to be considered for parole after serving 50% of his sentence. So on ordinary principles, Zuma would have been eligible to be considered for same after serving 7.5 months from the 15 months. Now, we are almost already around about in the 7.5 month period since his incarceration some months ago. So on any given day, he can be considered for ordinary parole, even as we sit here today, if he was in jail. Now, that being said, medical parole, as any other form of parole, is not a get-out-of-jail ticket. It's still a sentence, a sanction, which is part of your sentence, but which is actually then done outside of the prison building.
Yeah.
So, handing down a decision to say that, listen, the period, the last 3 months or so that he was outside doesn't count in his favor, that might be construed as highly unconstitutional, and I'm not, in my legal mind, so sure that the judge was entitled to hand down that part of the judgment. Therefore, my gut feeling is that even if it's only on that issue alone, we might expect a further legal battle coming our way in the Zuma debate and saga, even if it means that they will once again approach the Supreme Court of Appeal or the Concord as apex courts to consider that part of the judgment. And in any event, if that is the situation, and on the assumption that we see another application being filed very, very soon by Darlene Porfu and the other team leaders in Zuma's defense, then be sure by the time we get judgment in that one somewhere in mid-next year, his 15 months would have prescribed a long time ago. So whether we will ultimately see him going back to jail, that remains to be seen, unless obviously he once again had himself over voluntary. So that is a possibility.
That would be interesting indeed. Dr. Curlewis, I'm going to ask you about whether there are any legal implications for the person who took this decision, sidestepping a report of the Medical Parole Board. But here's a question I want to ask. Now that you've mentioned the phrase, get out of jail card, that being medical parole. If you are someone like the former president, Jacob Zuma, who has a lot of legal matters that he's settled with right now, if this decision to place him on medical parole had stood, whatever other court cases that he may have been going through, we know that there are criminal ones as well, might he have escaped jail? Say, for example, he were to be found guilty on the arms deal matter and the sentence is imprisonment. Might he have gotten out of jail because he is a person who was granted medical parole?
Yeah. Okay, so now there are two questions that you've asked. The first one is very easy to answer, and that is the one regarding Arthur Fraser. Is he going to get some, let's call it then, reprimand or whatever because of his ill-considered decision? And the answer is a simple, basically no. He made that in his capacity as then acting commissioner or commissioner at the time. And the simple truth is he made a wrong decision and he's going to say, sorry, I made a wrong decision, obviously, but that's what I did. And as far as I'm concerned, I stood with what I did. Now that it's been set aside, doesn't make a difference to me ultimately. I'm not serving as commissioner anymore. So I don't think there's going to be repercussions for him. On the second issue, yes, each case must obviously be considered on its own merits. Now, on the assumption, as you stated, that he is convicted ultimately on the arms deal case, then he will be sentenced. And he will be sentenced like any other person. And obviously, he will probably get a long jail term imprisonment sentence for such a transgression if he's found guilty. But once that is done, then the matter gets out of the hands of the Department of Justice and the court system into correctional services hands. And they then have the prerogative to then decide whether he is a person eligible for medical parole or any other form of parole. And based on this decision, and let's say this decision stood, they can then refer back to his medical situation and say, but listen, if he is already on medical parole for another matter, he still has the same medical conditions and terminal illness or whatever the case may be. And as a result, once again, we are going to grant him medical parole because it's got nothing to do with the court system anymore and with the judges and the court's decisions. It's now our prerogative to decide whether he is a person that should stay in jail until the ultimate sentence has been finalized. So be careful to confuse the sentence being handed down by the courts and the ultimate play out of what happens to him after he's incarcerated, because that is two different, let's call it then, although it's the same minister, Lamola, that must make the ultimate decision, two different departments in former years, and basically it's two totally different questions that must be asked.
Sure. Final question to you, Doctor. There is the matter around the former president and what ails him not being disclosed. If you look at the court papers, which you have yet to do, by the way, I've had a look at the wording here, and they do talk about the fact that he is not terminally ill. Is that the and only condition for medical parole, that someone has to be terminally ill for them to qualify for medical parole?
It used to be exactly that until Shabir Sheikh's matter came to the forehand. After Shabir Sheikh received medical parole, and because, with all due respect, he was not terminally ill, the legislator then decided to amend the relevant section of the Act to also include any other reasonable reason, let's call it then, that is to be found in the discretion of the commissioner, to count in favor of him rather getting out of prison than staying there, could be considered. So terminal illness is not the only and exclusive fact to be taken into consideration for what is alleged to be known as medical parole. Medical parole has a very, very wide definition these days, unlike prior to Shabir Sheikh's days, when medical parole exclusively only included terminal illness. So no, there are other factors to be taken into consideration as well.
Very interesting chat indeed. Dr. Llewelyn Curlewis, a legal expert. Thank you very much for your insights on this matter. Thanks indeed for your time.